People who quit their jobs in a blaze of glory. What's your story? I was a server in a really crappy restaurant. It was owned by a husband and wife. The wife was truly in charge and responsible for actually getting most things done. The husband was a hot-headed jerk who showed up from time to time to kick the cook out of the kitchen and play chef himself. He was terrible at cooking. His wife did her best to keep him out of the restaurant altogether, but he did as he pleased. Luckily, he was also lazy, and running a restaurant is work, so he was not there very often. Anyway, one day on a slow morning when I was the only server, he came in to cook breakfast and was just ruining everything. He was smoking a cigar in the kitchen, using way too much grease, and burning things. Customers would order scrambled eggs and bacon. How hard is that? And he would give me black and mystery substances dripping with grease to bring to the table. I refused. He screamed at me, within earshot of customers, and told me he was the restaurateur, not me, so I had better do as I was told. So I took the awful food to the tables. They complained and asked me to replace it, looking at me like they could not believe I would have brought it to the table in the first place. I brought it back to the kitchen, and the hothead could not believe they did not want it. He did not believe me and yelled at me some more. I was not about to bring the same food out to the table, so I refused and told him to do it himself. As you can imagine, he did not like that very much and he let me know loudly, but he did take it out. They gave him the same response they gave me, and he shouted at them. He launched into a rant about how they had no idea what food was, how he grew up in Greece where food was an art, how he went to school and owned a restaurant. What credentials did they have? Who were they to question his food? He told them his restaurant was only for people who truly appreciated food and they could just go eat somewhere else. They left in silence. I think they were too shocked by what had happened to come up with a rebuttal. When he came back from his incident with them, he told me I was on thin ice and he did not care for the backtalk I had given him. He said that if I did not like the way he ran things, I could just leave. I was the only server in the place. I was so pissed off I could not see straight, and he had just told me to leave if I did not like how he operated. I did not like how he operated, so I left. He must not have realized there were no other servers, because I immediately got a voicemail saying it was all a misunderstanding and I should come back because they were busy. How they were busy, I do not know, and everything would be alright. Luckily, I was working 2 jobs at that time, so I had the option of picking up more hours at the other place. I did not answer his calls until hours later when the voicemail started sounding really desperate. All I said was I cannot talk because I am working my other job, but I am not coming back, so stop calling. I heard from ex-co-workers that his wife came in shortly thereafter, cried uncontrollably, and closed the place for the rest of the day. That did make me feel bad because she was a nice lady who worked hard, and I can only imagine how hard it was to try to run a restaurant with a husband like that. One of my first jobs was part-time at a small-budget supermarket. The boss was a jerk with very limited intelligence, assigning me far more shifts than I had agreed to and spending the entire day shouting at everyone instead of doing actual work. It turned out I was also getting €1 less per hour than agreed. I noticed that after a month when I finally got my first paycheck. Not cool. That was enough for me to terminate my employment contract with immediate effect. So I got myself a new job, typed out my notice, put it in my coat pocket, and waited for the worst possible moment to quit. That moment came 2 weeks later. My boss and I were opening on a Saturday, and it just so happened that the cashier who was meant to come in an hour later called in sick. He told me and went off on a tirade about how the shift was going to be hell with just the 2 of us. I smiled, handed him my notice, and strolled out of the store without saying a word. I used to work recording concerts for my school's conservatory. Basically, students could pay a fee for the conservatory to record their concerts and put it on a compact disc for them. I had had the job as a work-study since I was a freshman, and I loved it. In the second half of my senior year, I received a call from my boss saying that I had messed up a disc and that I needed to meet him in the studio to fix it at 4 p.m. I thought that was an odd request. Mistakes sometimes happen, but all of the employees knew how to fix it themselves, and I was the most experienced worker he had at that point. I asked if I could just fix it earlier and submit it to our office assistant, but he insisted I come in at 4. I showed up about 15 minutes before 4 to figure out what had gone wrong. I put the disc in and immediately heard it was a completely different concert. That was really bizarre, but we have backups of all the audio, so I just burned another copy of the correct concert from that. As the disc was burning, my boss came in and told me that I was fired. He said messing up a disc that badly was unacceptable. I had never been fired before. This was the longest I had ever had a job, and I was totally blindsided. To this day I have no idea how the wrong concert ended up on that disc. The best I can figure is the office assistant mixed up the discs or something, but whoever's fault it was a really easy problem to fix. I argued with him for a bit, telling him that I thought he was making a mistake and this really wasn't a big deal, but he refused to listen. Just when I had resigned myself to my fate, the newly burned disc popped out of the computer. We both looked at it for about 5 seconds in silence. I laughed, handed it to him, shook his hand, and walked out the door. I wasn't done, though. I loved that job, and I felt wronged. I was also saving up for a trip to Europe and didn't want to have to cancel it. I already had tickets to Wack Ken. Without a job or a girlfriend, I had a lot of time on my hands that last semester. So I decided I would just start my own business recording students' concerts using my own equipment. I charged a slightly lower fee than my former employer and put up advertisements online and around the conservatory. I advertised that I was more experienced than anyone working for conservatory audio, and frankly my equipment was better as long as they weren't playing at one of the bigger venues, especially for jazz. Also, instead of burning discs, I offered to send the recordings digitally, which a lot of students preferred because they would get them within an hour or two of the end of the concert rather than several days later. College students are cheap, and it didn't take long before I had to hire my own assistant to keep up with all the concerts we were recording. I probably ended up cutting the conservatory audio department's business by at least 20%. My former boss was livid, and he made a couple of unsuccessful attempts to shut us down. I earned more money that semester than I probably had in my previous 3.5 years combined of working for someone else. I was just mad at myself for not doing it earlier. The only problem is I don't feel comfortable putting that job on my resume anymore. This is sort of the opposite, but whatever. I was working for a tech startup in '98 that was growing by leaps and bounds, and one day they reorganized the department and promoted this guy, let's call him Teddy, who had been there for like 2 weeks, to manager. He had 4 or 5 people working for him, and he treated them all terribly. They were all self-motivated, senior-level people, and he treated them like children. He micromanaged their work, berating everything they did, and complained when they had to leave work for things like a dentist appointment or a sick kid. When he first took over, he tried to enforce a policy where none of them could check in code unless he reviewed it in person and then did the check-in himself. That lasted less than 2 weeks. He reviewed an existing, approved schedule for a software release, decided it was not aggressive enough, told his superiors they were going to pull it in by 3 months, and then ordered everyone to work weekends. Not because there was a business need, but because he wanted to show them he could get stuff done. After a few months, this woman, let's call her Kelly, who was working for him, gave her 2 weeks' notice, saying she was offered a managerial job at another company. Teddy lost it. You could hear him screaming through the walls of his office, then as she walked out of the office and he followed her to the exit, shouting at her the whole time. You're totally worthless, Kelly, you're going to fail, don't come crawling back looking for a job, I'm glad to see you go, now I can hire someone with real skills, etc. For at least a month after she was gone, he would randomly just say stuff like, I can't believe that jerk just up and left, what an awful person, or, oh, Kelly really messed things up badly. We're probably going to miss our release date because of how she left things. HR sat down privately with the guy to talk things over, and then he started complaining about HR. They're covering themselves so they don't get sued. They don't care about good company men like me. A few months later our company was acquired, and we went to the welcome meeting that the other company had set up. Their CTO and the VP of development spent about half an hour each talking about strategic vision, how the changes would affect us, the usual stuff, and then the VP said, but there will be at least one familiar face to help with the transition. I think most of you know Kelly Johnson. She used to work here, and she will be the senior manager in charge of the products team moving forward. Everyone looked back at Teddy, who was white as a sheet and looked like he was about to have a heart attack. He was gone within a month. After working there for over 2 years, starting at the bottom when there were only 3 employees, including me, and becoming supervisor/manager, I was overdue for a raise. The boss kept putting off our meeting to discuss it, and I had prepped a small presentation to show what I had accomplished in my position over the past year. Meeting day finally came, and I spoke for 15 minutes to justify the raise I had asked for, but instead of a negotiation I was told that my work had been unsatisfactory and they no longer wanted me to act as supervisor. This came as a shock because they had never given me negative feedback about the way I was running things, and they let me plead my case for a raise seconds before terminating my responsibilities. Of course, they would love me to stay at the company and train the new hires at my current, sad, salary and work on entry-level tasks when there was no active training. They also expected me to stay in the role I was not excelling in for another 2 to 4 months to allow them time to recruit my replacement and allow me time to get that person up to speed and adequately trained. The best part of all of this is that they had never hinted at or officially advised me of any issues with the quality of my work. I walked out as soon as they were done speaking without saying anything. A few hours later he called asking if I would come back. The next morning I met with Human Resources, who apologized and said they were shocked, and suggested I speak with the boss to see if things could be sorted, hoping to find a happy medium. So I went to his office, shut the door, and told him what a jerk he was and that he had lost all the respect I ever had for him, but that I would finish the week and close my open cases without hinting to clients about how awful everything was behind the scenes in exchange for a larger severance package and being laid off. It turned out for the best because I'm pretty happy where I am now. I worked at a technical support call center for almost a decade. The average burnout time and turnover is 6 months. I was sitting in a meeting, and they were ragging on us for sending too many boxes. The week previously we were sitting in the exact same room being ragged on for not sending enough boxes. I had a rough year, and I was just sitting there dying inside. I had this sudden epiphany. Every day since I had walked in the door of that place was worse than the last. There was literally no reason for me to be there. That thought just popped into my head like a light bulb going off. I got up in the middle of the meeting and walked out without a word. The SDM giving the meeting had his mouth hanging open. He was not used to the drones doing things like this. He started after me, and I ignored him. I went back to my desk, gathered up some things, gave a few other things to some people, and got a goodbye email out. The whole time, the SDM was getting more and more agitated, trying to talk to me, eventually yelling. I just ignored him like a bad smell at a dinner party, so I just went home. They called and called for days. Eventually, a supervisor I had on Facebook messaged me. He was an okay dude, and I told him flatly that no, I was not returning. He said they had all this paperwork to do, and an exit interview, and so on. I said no, I was not going back on that floor. I was not going to sit in an office like a bad teenager in the principal's office. It was over, it was done. We finally agreed to meet downstairs in an empty cubicle. I flatly did not agree to anything, did not sign anything, just gathered whatever shit they had for me and left. For nearly a decade they dictated everything in my life. My sleep schedule, my family life, holidays. They went so far as to time, to the second, how long I was in the bathroom during the day. That was all over. They had no more control over me, and I enjoyed making that clear. I was working at a wing place just out of college as a cook. I started working there and everything was going okay except for the fact that I was really underpaid. I was making minimum wage as one of 2 cooks in the restaurant. After a few months, the manager sat down to talk with me. We discussed a few things, and I brought up that I really deserved a raise. I was working 50 to 60 hours a week, and the compensation for my effort really wasn't evening out. He basically told me to get lost and that cooks are a dime a dozen. So I told him I was disappointed with his response. Times were tough for me then, so I bit my lip and went back to work. The next few months were hell. The manager would openly put me down in front of other employees and constantly berate me for asking for more money. He would put me on back-to-back opening and closing shifts and send people home on purpose so I would be the only one left to clean the kitchen at the end of the night. I was beginning to lose my cool with this job. So finally Super Bowl Sunday rolls around, and for those unaware, this is a very, very busy day for restaurants that make wings. I get into work and everyone is already pissed. I ask what's up, and they tell me the other cook didn't show up and nothing is prepped for the day. I roll up my sleeves and start working. We get everything set, and I start making wings for the orders. I'm working my tail off, and my manager comes up to me and starts giving me the same garbage. The phones are ringing like crazy, and there are more orders than the restaurant can handle. It's total chaos. Then some of the manager's friends, not employees, come into the kitchen and start messing with all my stuff. Moving things, disorganizing stuff, sitting on my prep counters. I tell them to get out, and my manager storms in and lays into me. He tells me I'm a worthless nobody, I never do anything right, I'm not worth more than minimum wage, and I never put in any extra effort. That was it. My brain just clicked, and I stopped caring about anything. I stood up straight and stretched out my arms wide. I slowly took off my kitchen apron and removed my hat. I stared straight into the manager's eyes and calmly but sternly said, "Have an enjoyable Super Bowl Sunday." I threw the apron and my hat into the fryer oil basins, grabbed my bag, and walked past the rest of the employees, whose mouths were hanging open, and out the back to the ever-fading ring of phones. I arrived home and met up with my roommates. I told them the story, and we decided to order 200 wings and watch the game. Blaze of glory? Not really. Going out? Well, I tried. I was 20 years old, working at a car dealership as a lot attendant, basically parking cars and cleaning up garbage. I was in charge of 5 other lot guys. It was not bad, but a new manager was hired, 27 years old, and on a total power trip. In my opinion, that is too young to be in charge of guys who had been working on cars for 25 to 30 years. Anyway, unknown to me, one day he threw a fit, all red-faced, and fired 4 of my 5 guys. We were a good team and stuff got done. I got called in on my day off to work, and being the nice guy, I went in. That is when I found out my guys were fired. I got called into his office, and he let me know it was my fault they got fired and I needed to adjust my attitude. I freaked out internally but managed to keep my head. I calmly told him he could go screw himself and I would not be abused like that after faithfully doing my job. I was done, and he could park cars while it was a whole 5 degrees Fahrenheit outside. Before I could leave his office, the owner walked in. He told me to sit and take a deep breath, then sent the manager upstairs. The owner begged me to stay because he needed me to run customer check-in and the lot. He gave me a small bonus and a $3 per hour raise. The manager was fired at the end of the pay week. The only job I ever tried to walk out of. My small-time office was bought out and taken over by a large company. Suddenly I was told I was just a secretary, my salary was cut, benefits non-existent, and there was nothing I could legally do because I checked. They did it in such a way that it was as if I had started a new job. The new office manager told someone that his high school son could do my job for less pay, so in the summer my hours were cut. I finally said forget this and didn't show up. After bullying and tearful trips home, then I began to get frantic emails about how to deposit and split certain payments, how to use accounting programs, how to enter time-sensitive forms. So much whining. I guess nobody trained the boy and just sat him at the front desk. At first it was professional, then it turned to hostility, then begging. This was over the span of 2 days, during which I didn't check my email because I was busy at another job. I finally broke down and wrote an email stating I had all the information they needed stored on a website. At the bottom of the page was a link to Google. I signed it, just as secretary. Growing up in a small town, the guy who umpired all the Little League games was a great umpire, but he had some issues, like he was somewhere on the autism spectrum. Like many folks on the spectrum, he could pick one thing and focus on it and be good. His thing was baseball. At the end of the Little League season, the coaches wanted to have a tournament with all the teams in town. I think there were like 6 teams, that had not been planned, so the city did not budget for it. Everyone pitched in to get the fields ready, and the umpire was more than happy to volunteer to umpire the games. Anyhow, since this was now some arbitrary tournament, some parents started giving the umpire a hard time, and by the time it got to the championship game, one guy in particular was ruthless. Finally, the umpire had enough, threw off his mask, and went off on the guy, saying, "Forget you, I have had enough of your crap. You want an umpire for this game, do it yourself," and on for a couple of minutes. Then he got on his bike and rode away. Another parent who played college baseball stepped in to umpire, and the jerk parent was told to get out. The sad thing is the original umpire never worked for the recreation department again. The one thing this dude could do normally was taken away from him. There was not even a trophy or prize involved in this tournament. It was just an opportunity for 11-year-olds to play a few more games. Man, now I'm upset. I do not know if this is a blaze of glory, but it made me feel good. I got a job in the big city. My new manager said she wanted to give me a 2-week trial period because she just was not sure about me. This manager was a real jerk. She was constantly yelling, expecting us to work through lunch, stay late, and come in early, with sessions in her office about how awful we were. I was miserable. The job was hell. On the Friday at the end of my trial period, my manager called me into her office. She said she was pleasantly surprised at how good I was and definitely wanted to keep me on. I told her that unfortunately she had not passed her trial period and I would not be staying. Then I walked out. Best elevator ride down to the lobby ever. Not me, but my dad. My dad was the chief of police in our small town, about 2,500 people, as I was growing up. Aside from him, there were 2 other town police officers. In a small town, all that really matters to people is who you're in with and how much money you have. The mayor was in with a lot of bad people. People who would get arrested time and time again, only to be seen walking the streets the next day. It wasn't a safe town. It wasn't a fair place. One day, I came home from school to find a news crew and a van at my house, interviewing my dad. He and the other 2 police officers had walked into work that morning and all turned in their badges at the same time. They got their story out there. Not much could be done about the mayor, but at least most people knew the truth. I worked at the Disney store, not run by Disney at this point, but the Children's Place, for 6 months as a part-time manager when I was 23. It was a nightmare, totally disorganized. The full-time managers hated each other and sabotaged each other's performance, and mine, I found out later, when my sales were too good consistently, and the store manager was an alcoholic who would spend the first 3 hours of her shifts with me in the back room, nursing a hangover. Another store offered me a similar position paying slightly more, and I got to give the news in the middle of an informal review, that is, scapegoating, from the alcoholic manager. I gave 2 weeks, because I'm nice like that, but I knew they were basically in a bind because I was leaving just before the holidays. My last week on the job, I did whatever I wanted. Cannot afford the light-up fairy wings for your granddaughter. Kid buying mom a present. Just a nice person treating me like a human being. Magic discount for you. I've never felt so good leaving a job. I worked at a travel agency as an in-house web designer. I also did general office tasks. One day my boss, who boasts about traveling 120 days a year, decided to go on vacation in Europe along with most of the office, leaving me to hold down the fort. I was fine with it, since there was likely very little work to be done and I was going to make a lot of extra money. When he got back, a customer complained that the cruise they had booked online was cancelled. I was blamed for it because apparently I was supposed to process their payment in our system. Keep in mind, this was not my client. I had no knowledge of any responsibilities toward this client, and it was not part of my normal duties to process payments. At the end of the day my boss took me to the back room, a cramped, uncomfortable space, to talk to me about how I had messed up. I denied everything because this was my boss's way of placing the blame on someone else for his own mistakes. He told me to take 2 days off to think about how I can grow with the company, and finished by tapping my shoulder and saying, "Grow up, my name," with a smug-looking smile. To top it off, he had also reduced my hourly rate by $1 per hour, after I had worked there with distinction for almost a year. I was absolutely livid. As soon as I left for the day, I went home, chilled out, and started planning my next move. The next day I applied for a couple of jobs and got an interview on the second day at another company. I was offered the position and started a couple of weeks later. When I went back to the travel agency, I sat down and waited for my boss, who always had a habit of coming in late. Once he did, I said, quite loudly, "Boss's name, I came here to let you know that I quit. I don't want to continue to work for you for less money. I also expect to find my final check in my mailbox by next Monday at my regular pay rate." He replied, "Do you have a timesheet?" I said, "It is your responsibility to keep track of my hours, so you had better have them." He said, "Okay, have a nice day." That was the end of it. I ended up taking him to court later over unpaid wages and won. Not the best way to earn a severance, but it worked.